Want to save a truckload? Get a Peterbilt 579 from Brandt with payments as low as $3,500 a month. Get the same low rates for your choice of contract length, 3, 4, or 5 years, and you can buy or walk when the contract ends. It's the only payment plan that puts you in the driver's seat. You could say it's a big rig deal. Drive to your Brandt Peterbilt dealer to...
Hello everybody and welcome to Paranormal Guys Inc. Radio, episode number 15. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Bassett, and he's here with us right now online. How are you today, Mr. Bassett?
I'm just fine, Jason. Very fine.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And let's get right into the show. I want to tell everybody who you are. You're one of the main advocates right now that's going to be undertaking a program to have full disclosure. And if you could, please, can you go into detail of how this all began for you and the history of Steve Bassett himself?
Well, I entered the issue in 1996, specifically not to get involved in the science of UFOs, which I felt was the science of sightings and trying to prove that something was going on in the skies was well established, and had proven that clearly there was a non-human presence up there traveling around. But rather to get into the political resolution of the issue, to bring it finally to the public domain, which meant that the U.S. government was going to have to finally acknowledge formally to the people what a lot of people already know, and that's that there's an extraterrestrial presence, that this is real. And I entered in 96 to do that and formed the Paradigm Research Group. And since then, I have used every advocacy tool possible to advance what we call the disclosure process.
Right. And
the disclosure process is the process leading to disclosure. And disclosure, as we define it, is very, very specific. It has a capital D, and it's the formal acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence by the governments of the world, probably starting with the United States. And over the 13 years, I registered as a lobbyist on the issue in 96. I was the first to ever do that. I started the first political action committee devoted to this in 99, XPAC, x-ppac.org.
Yes. I
created the Paradigm Clock, which got a lot of press back in the 90s as a way of attracting attention to the concept of disclosure. Paradigm Clock, midnight on that clock was disclosure. I ran for Congress on the issue and got on the ballot in 2002 in a fairly important and well-covered race in Maryland, 8th District, and then started the X conferences in 2004. We've now had 5 of those, where we brought the issue and speakers to the capital area, along with press conferences at the National Press Club. Also founded the Exopolitics World Network, which is now up to 17 countries, and we're building now an Exopolitics United States Network, which is incipient with a few states involved. In those 13 years, this issue has gone worldwide. The disclosure movement is now global and growing, and there are many, many organizations. The home base for all of this, for me, is paradigmresearchgroup.org, and that is a port to 4 or 5 different sites.
I've listed all of your important websites in the chat room. We have some guests there, and if they wanted to click the links, you can definitely take a look at everything that Mr. Bassett's speaking of right now.
Yeah, so that's and then there's many other groups are involved, and they have been networked. I've networked with them, assisted. So there's a lot of this is a cyberspace movement essentially. It's spread all over through the web.
I just wanted to ask you, did you have any personal story related to this? Did you ever experience anything? Have you seen something? Was there anything that drove you further to get into this, or was it just, for the mere fact that things were being kept from the public?
No, I have never had a personal experience of any kind. My interest in the issue is based on its fundamental profundity. It's the most profound issue in the world today,
Right.
It has enormous implications. It also has significant political implications because the truth embargo was a monumental effort, task, built around the national security structures created in 1947 and afterwards. And that has resulted in fairly substantial impact on the course of the United States, its history, its policies, in a lot of ways. And they're intertwined. It's not separate, never was, from the vital interest of the United States and its policy and War and Peace. And when you get into the ET issue, you start to find out things which are concerning with respect to the terrestrial parts of it and other aspects that are connected to it. So you enter another world, and that world is messy, and it has to be dealt with. It is I call it the secret empire. It's like huge. If you think of the country as not the ship of state but the house of state, with 3 or 4 floors above ground, well, the secret empire is about 20 stories underground, and it's gotten very large, and the Nordwood is locked. You can't get down there, and things are getting pretty messy, and it's starting to stink down there. So there are a lot of very powerful reasons why this issue has to be engaged. Don't have to see.
I also
I've
have
actually
my
heard of stories of certain.
And that's why I'm involved.
Yeah, one for Chicago O'Hare is supposedly an underground base. I don't know if you ever heard about that or.
I'm sorry, Jason. We lost a little signal there. Could you repeat?
Oh, sorry. It's actually Derek here. Just wanted to say hi, the co-host here. Yeah, I was just wondering, Chicago O'Hare Airport, supposedly they say there is an underground base. Hello?
Mr. Bassett? Hello? It appears we have possibly lost Mr. Bassett. Sounded like he was calling from a cell phone. I hope he'll call back. So just bear with us. It's a bit of a tech issue. And while we have a moment, I'd like to give a quick hello to all of our groups that we're a part of. We'll take that opportunity now. Oh, here he is. Never mind. We'll do that in a short amount of time. Hello, Mr. Bassett.
I am actually in the midst right now of a sea of power lines, which we'll be out of in just a minute or two. So
no
bear
problem.
with us.
We're just joking around because usually with every show we've done so far, there's usually 1 or 2 issues. So hopefully that's the only issue we have.
Or maybe someone didn't like my question.
No. So what? Repeat that question again. Let me give it a shot.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you ever heard. Supposedly, you were talking about underground bases. Supposedly, under Chicago O'Hare International Airport, there's supposed to be bases supposedly under there. I don't know.
I'm not aware of that. I think there may be some confusion there. There's a lot of speculation, and it's serious speculation, that there is a substantial facility underground near the Denver airport.
Oh.
And then early in last year, January 2008, there was a major sighting at the O'Hare airport.
Oh, yes, yes.
Which is a significant event, which is never explained, naturally. And just one sighting, but a fairly well-documented sighting that gets piled on top of the mountain of evidence. But there's a lot of speculation about the Denver airport. My understanding is that the backup capital to the United States, which used to be in West Virginia at a hotel. This is a limited facility built way back in the 50s. It's now open to the public. You can actually go and see some of it. That it was shifted to a fairly advanced facility near the Denver airport underground, so that if there's a nuclear attack, the entire Congress and the fundamental workings of the government will actually go there, operate underground, and be able to come and go by tunnels through the Denver airport, maximum safety, minimum exposure. But obviously the government does not acknowledge that or confirm it, but it's a well-founded rumor, which would not surprise me at all if it were true.
Yeah, that's right, because even in such films like Terminator 3, they kind of touched a little bit on that secret base near the Denver area. But I also wanted to get into a little bit of comparison between the two websites that you operate. One is more for the Million Facts on Washington movement, and the other one is basically for your research. Can you explain to the people out there what the similarities and differences are between the two?
Well, the Million Facts is one of, when you go to the paradigmresearchgroup.org website, there are a number of sub-sites for the work, one of which is the Million Facts in Washington. It's the ongoing project, advocacy project of PRG, the most important one, actually, to date. So it's just one other website. But it's certainly the one that your listeners need to know about. Now, it has a direct address, which is fax, that's F-A-X, faxonwashington.org. And this is a big deal. This entire project was planned in early 2008, going into what everyone knew was going to be one of the biggest and most expensive presidential elections in history, which it proved to be, with a huge number of candidates and scores of debates, which there were. And so early on, and I won't go into all the details, it would take too long, but early on, and for all through 2008, an enormous effort was made to raise the awareness of the political press to the issues, particularly as they connected to any of the candidates, and try to get this infused into the campaign. I mean, I happen to consider the presence of extraterrestrials engaging the human race to be a matter of some significance.
Right.
There are those that don't think it is. There are actually people, and I've had this told to me, who say, yeah, I know there's ETs here, but it's not a big deal, so why do we want to bother the politicians about it? That's an extraordinary statement, but I've actually heard it. In any event, we were pretty successful. There was a lot of press and a lot of media that took place that did connect the issues and the candidates. We didn't get any questions to the candidates, though, until near the end of the campaign season. It was September 30 in Philadelphia, when Dennis Kucinich was asked a serious question about a UFO sighting he had by Tim Russert. Obama was asked a question after the campaign, then Bill Richardson was asked a question by Chris Matthews. All fine, well and good. That was the first part of this, or the prelude to the Million Facts in Washington. And so once the election was over, we launched phase one of the Million Facts, which basically was simple. Let's get as many letters and fax emails into the presidential transition headquarters as possible between the inauguration day and the election, which is November 5th to January 20th. And we set up faxonwashington.org, and I did a lot of media. I must have done 60 interviews on that. So over the next 77 days, thousands of letters and emails did go into the presidential transition headquarters. And there was a lot that was done on the website. They had a website called change.gov, which intentionally was very engaging of the public. They did a lot of feedback kind of things, and we were involved in that. We got the ET issue mentioned in a number of these prominently. So there was a lot of exposure there. And that was phase one. Phase two began the day after the inauguration, January 21st, and was scheduled to go through the first 100 days, which would have ended on April 30. That's that famous legendary 100 days that everybody sort of come to know. That's when the political capital is high, things can happen, and a lot of things going on. Okay, fine. We extended it, however, another 31 days to May 31st because just the extraordinary circumstances of the new administration. The degree of crises that we're facing, a number of crises immediately, clearly, this was a tough gig. So we added an extra 131 days, and we said, okay, for the 131 days, from January 21st to May 31st, we want you to be sending letters, faxes, and emails into the White House. And that was easy, because the White House has a very fine address, very well-known fax number, and a very good email page, and even a comment line. So they were getting comments on their phone line as well. And so since January 21, thousands of letters, emails, and faxes have been going in, and all of this correspondence is drawing from talking points at the website factsonwashington.org. Talking points basically are about, there's four fundamental ones. One, they want the president to get a full briefing from his military and intelligence services, that they want congressional hearings. They want the president to call for congressional hearings. They want disclosure itself. They want the government to acknowledge the ET president just outright. And then the big one, in my opinion, the Cracker Jack prize, the prize in the Cracker Jack box, is they want the technology, which we firmly believe has been in their possession from these crashed vehicles going back 60 years, that they have been working on assiduously, and I think have made quite a bit of progress, and we want that tech available for peaceful uses.
Right.
So these kinds of demands and requests have been pouring into the White House, and prior to that, the transition of headquarters since November the 5th. In 5 days, on June the 1st, we start the final phase of Facts on Washington, Phase 3. And this is the culmination of this entire project, and it will mostly take place in the month of June. I've already booked 40-some hours of radio interviews and expect to book another 20 or 30 hours of interviews in June to keep this issue in play. And many organizations and writers will be get your letter. Get your letter to Washington.org. Get your letter into President Obama, or your fax or email, or all three. Get those in, and then make sure you check on the evening of June the 1st. Check the website, factsonwashington.org, for the particulars regarding Phase 3. This phase is designed to do nothing less than trigger disclosure itself. It is designed to create a circumstance which irreversibly puts the disclosure issue in play and puts the government in a position where they have to disclose immediately, June, July, August, very soon. That is the game plan. And if everyone who is involved does their job, if they participate as they've indicated, and if the public participates to a reasonable degree, I believe it will in fact do that. So that's what the Facts on Washington is about.
That's absolutely amazing. Let me ask you though, I've already sent my support for this, but can international people, say from Canada, Europe, Australia, also be a part of this? And will their voices and faxes be recognized as well? Absolutely. There is absolutely no reason at all why anybody around the world, we want them to, cannot send a letter, fax, and email to the White House. The email is via the website, whitehouse.gov, so it's an email, form. The fax number, well, you just got to have the foreign, the U.S. code, U.S. Numbers. And, of course, the letter is straightforward. So, yes, we want as many foreign correspondence as possible. This issue is global. And the truth embargo instituted by the United States has impact on everybody, every country. So we're hoping that they will get a lot of such foreign email, and it will get their attention, no question. This is a great segue. Have you ever approached the United Nations for any kind of intervention as well? And have other governments approached you in any way as a spokesperson? No governments have approached me as a spokesperson. The UN has been approached on a number of occasions. Yeah, the UN, of course, as you know, has had a rough time. It was a pawn of the two superpowers during the Cold War. It was kind of set up and designed to service the Cold War superpowers. When the Cold War ended, it was not restructured. It's belittled and undermined and underfunded,
and I believe inappropriately so. It's a big mistake.
Right.
But it has been approached on this issue. There's been a few incidents that have occurred. There's kind of a history there. If you were to Google UN UFO, you could get a lot of this. Gordon Cooper approached the UN back in the 80s to try to get some things going. The Prime Minister of Grenada, interesting enough, a guy named Gary, he tried to get the issue in play at the UN, perhaps to promote Grenada. But it didn't go well for him. In fact, when he came to the UN to discuss the matter and introduce it, there was a coup in his country, and he was essentially thrown out of office while he was in the U.S. And recently there has been rumors that meetings have been taking place at the UN about this issue, off-the-record kind of meetings. I have talked to one principal over the phone who was there. He seemed impressive to me on the phone. Two of my colleagues who have met with him in person, and he presented credentials which they found to be compelling. And so these rumors are true, and that there was a meeting held to address the issue. The UN certainly is the appropriate agency or entity to be involved, without question. But how? I would not be surprised if there's not more going on over there in New York than we know about. But I don't have direct knowledge of that. If I get more knowledge, if I can confirm, for instance, the UN meetings of a number of months ago, I will go public with that. But I don't have enough information to confirm it to my satisfaction.
You would probably be the best entity to actually release the information. You know, considering the United Nations, it doesn't really point the finger at one government.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would probably be the best.
I could very well, a disclosure event that was done by the UN with the understanding and advanced cooperation of most of the first world governments would be a very appropriate way to go. I don't think that's going to happen, though, but there's a certain logic to it.
It would probably look better on them, towards the public at least. They're forthcoming,
Well, which government to you would you feel, other than the American government, would be the most likely to give full disclosure first? Or is it just going to be a unilateral effort from the entire world?
Well, as I've said numerous times, if the Obama administration does not disclose soon, particularly after the pressure that's going to be brought on it in June, that there's a very good likelihood, perhaps 50-50, better than 50-50, that another nation will disclose before the end of the year and take that historical legacy for its own. The likely candidates are France, China, the United Kingdom, maybe Canada. Not sure about Canada, but France, China, and the United Kingdom are the three that I think are most likely. Possible dark horse candidate would be Brazil.
Brazil, yes. Or even Mexico.
Which is a major nation. Yeah, a major nation that would like, I think, to have more influence in the world. I mean, it's one of the largest nations in the world, and of course it's the largest nation in South America. So these are the kind of candidates who could very well do it. But there are any number of the governments could. Any government, any first world government. I'm sorry?
Even the Soviet Union as well. I know there's been a lot of good cases there, and a lot of things I found were a little more open. I've read a lot of books from the past about the Soviet Union and a lot of things. They just seem a little more open towards it, that's all, in my opinion.
It's complicated. Russia,
it's
a very complicated situation now, and I think their view is somebody else is probably going to do it.
Yeah.
We don't need the grief.
Yeah.
Right.
They know what they need to know.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the historical legacy that comes from the country that does this first is so huge that it's got to be tempting to the leaders of any of the major nations. It's like, do you remember who came in second at the last Boston Marathon? I mean, who lost the World Series last year? I mean, you instantly disappear into history. So there's a huge legacy here, and so any number of nations, any nation that has an air force that's been sending up chase planes with gun camera videos to record what they see, which is standard procedure, any one of those nations has got chase plane gun camera footage that would be more than adequate to convince their citizens that, yep, these aren't ours, these are from somewhere else.
What's your take on all the amateur footage that's caught by random civilians around the world? Do you feel that just alone from that, is that enough to prove to the governments that there is something going on, which definitely they already know, but does that add more, push to get this out to the open?
Well, it adds pressure. I mean, the government already knows there's an ET presence. We don't need to prove that to them.
Right. But
it adds pressure. I mean, homeless people have cameras. I mean, they'll be on the street, no home, but they got a little basket there. They're cruising along, got themselves a nice little camera. There's hundreds of millions of cameras now, and they're taking the snapshots. Of course, there's plenty of fakes that turn up and what have you, and this muddies the water. Sure, it doesn't help if you've got thousands of photos of these craft turning up all over the internet. In fact, given the technology, night vision goggles, the internet, YouTube, the truth embargo still around and all is really amazing. It's like I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but it's hanging on by a thread, right? A light breeze could blow it down, and I think they know it. They know this. I mean, the government knows. It's one of the reasons why they have to act, because if it happens in a haphazard way, or if they're driven to it, it's very destructive. And public relations-wise, it's a disaster for the U.S. government if it's driven to disclosure, literally cornered and forced to come out, like a kid that's done something terrible, and their parents have to literally, berate the kid for months to finally get the truth out of them. This is not going to help with the parents. The U.S. has to come clean, in a formal and appropriate way, and a lot will be forgiven if it does. But if it does not, very little will be forgiven. So there's a lot at stake here, and the job of my job and my colleagues is to constantly remind the government what is at stake, so they don't forget.
I have a question from the chat group here. A person named Curious wants to know, what's your opinion on the reptilian? Is that something that's real? Have you heard any kind of groundbreaking evidence to prove that it is, or is that just some kind of diversion tactic?
I'm not a researcher. Let me make it clear. I'm a political activist. My knowledge is broad, but not deep. On that issue, I can say this: in the contact reports, of which there are tens of thousands, there is ample reference to reptoid beings. Now, what does that mean? It means that the human describes them as being like reptoids. Doesn't mean they're reptoids. They may not have an ounce of reptilian DNA in them, but they look like reptoids. In other words, you got to relate to this stuff.
Right.
And so they have come to be called that. And I think it's well established in the contactee research field that they are one of the entities which is involved, though less common than the standard grays. Now, there's another reptilian trajectory here, and that has to do with David Icke's work and the idea of aliens amongst us and shape-shifting reptilians. I have almost no opinion on that. I certainly am not aware of enough evidence to be able to invest in it. I don't have a high confidence in that idea. It's certainly exotic. It's sensational. But beyond that, I can't say.
I know you mentioned the technology that might be in the hands of some establishments. Do you feel that the Aurora project may in fact be a product of that technology?
I would assume that, if anybody wants to make a case that the United States government came into possession of extraterrestrial vehicles in the 40s and perhaps afterwards, and then simply put them in a big crate and stuck them in the ground and didn't look at them and they can make that case, but I think the odds are 1 in a million. If they got their hands on that technology, you can bet your bottom dollar that they have spent every dollar they could get looking, studying, examining, learning from, re-engineering, anything else they could do with that technology. And aside from Philip Corso's work and references to some tech transfers, the energy and the propulsion systems of those craft are not in the public domain. We can assume they tried to weaponize it. We could assume that if they were able to incorporate any of that tech in advanced planes, advanced fighter planes, or bombers, they might have done it. But the proof of that is not there, just the rumors, the odd reference. But the logic is compelling. So I operate under the assumption, until I learn otherwise, that they've had extraordinary technology. They've done an enormous amount of work on it. They've weaponized it to some degree, but it's not been developed for peaceful uses. And that technology is new physics, and the physics may very well be transcendent. In other words, remember when we went from the horsepower, horses and buggies, to steam engines, okay? Well, think of this transition as maybe several thousand times more profound than that, and you get a sense of what it could mean. But it's quite clear that until there is a formal acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence and the truth embargo is over, that tech is not going to be available for peaceful use. And so the message I have for the American people is end the embargo, get the tech. If you think we have problems right now, and I don't know how you could not. I mean, you can't watch the news every single day. You're hearing about another crisis, environmental, food, water, war, terrorism, melting ice caps, holes in the ozone, giant patches of garbage in the Pacific, and on and on and on. And then virtually no solutions of any substance. Minor, trivial stuff is tossed out there to ease your angst. Most everybody is on some kind of mood-altering drug. I mean, we're under threat from every direction. And the idea that transformative technology is stuck behind a truth embargo, they can't end because they can't find a good public relations way to do it, is no longer acceptable. And so if you like the idea of maybe 25 cent a gallon gas, and eventually electric cars that cost you a few pennies a mile to run, if you like the idea of maybe having air conditioning or heating bills for your home of a couple of dollars a month, if this appeals to you, if you like the idea of not having to turn the world upside down in order to reduce the carbon footprint and reverse global warming, then you want that tech. And if you want that tech, you've got to end the embargo. And if you want to end the embargo, you need to send a letter to the President between now and the end of May, get the info at factsonwashington.org, and then starting June the 1st, you will be asked to do something else in the month of June. And you can do it or not do it. It's up to you.
Yeah. Well, I remember
one famous speech by Ronald Reagan. I think he was addressing the UN about what if there's a common threat against us.
Right.
He didn't go into too specific, but I don't know if you remember that speech he made to the UN back in
Sure, made it several times.
Incredible, Bill.
Yeah, Reagan was briefed. I think, first of all, Reagan, I believe, can't prove, but I believe that Reagan was briefed as part of the selling package on the SDI program, Space Defense Initiative. They wanted him to sign off on that program, which virtually every competent physicist in the country said wouldn't work in terms of stopping Russian missiles. But they went ahead with it anyway, and I think one of the reasons they went ahead with it is because he was sold on the idea that it had a dual purpose. That, yeah, we might use it against the Soviets, but we may need it against the extraterrestrials. Yeah. And I don't think they gave him a big briefing. I don't think they gave him a lot of details. They just said, Ronald, there's ETs here. We may have to deal with them someday. We need this SDI. And so they just sold that program, no matter what any of the scientists said, Carl Sagan or anybody else. They pushed that program hard. So we think he got tipped. And with that kind of thing in his head, he just couldn't resist referring to the ETs. He did it on a number of occasions, drove his speechwriters crazy. He's basically a good man, an honest man, and he was just probably totally intrigued by it. Yeah. So it was a little glimpse, but he never talked about it afterwards. And the press didn't really question him very hard because the press got out of the journalism business about 35 years ago and hasn't gotten back in since. Well, they're starting to get back in, finally. But there was about a 30-year period there when you could have basically taken every journalist, dropped them in the ocean, and it wouldn't have affected the country one iota. So they didn't ask anything about it.
This also reminds me of Jimmy Carter, because he was on the verge of a full disclosure back in I think it was 78, if I'm correct. And,
not on the verge. Not on the verge.
Not on the verge, but close to it.
He dove into the issue. He entered the issue naively, not really knowing what he was getting into.
I remember. He filed the report at least.
Yeah, well, he filed his own report, and that got out in his campaign. And so that put the issue in play. He was the first candidate ever on a federal election ballot to talk about UFOs.
Well,
first one ever.
You could tell he was completely affected, but obviously he was told by a higher power not to come out with any information.
Well, what he did was, when he got in office, he'd gotten about 10,000 letters.
Yes.
And so he tried to respond to those letters. And he initiated a study, which raised a lot of alarm bells. And then another study was almost started as well, based from out of the Stanford Research Institute, but the Department of Defense shut that one down right away. So the one study that Carter got going was sort of allowed to run its course, sort of like a face-saving kind of thing. And that was it. And then he really shut up. And we speculate that he was given some very good reasons why he would stop that, not talk about it, and leave it alone for the rest of his life, which he has done, pretty much, with few exceptions. But we were never close to disclosure. In fact, I'll make it clear, there was no chance whatsoever, I mean, unless the extraterrestrials had done something really profound, which they could do if they wanted to. But they have chosen not to. There was no chance of disclosure before the Cold War was over. It simply wasn't going to happen. And so when Jimmy shows up in 76, 15 years before the end of the Cold War, when he started looking at ET issue, I can assure you there were a lot of people that were not happy about that. And then 15, how many years later? 70, say the election was 76. It was 22 years later in 2002 that I was the second person. It took 26 more years before I was the second person to ever speak on this subject while on the ballot in a federal election in November. So that's how slow the pace is. But things are picking up now.
That's for sure. And I wanted to touch this on you and see what you think. Do you think the truth embargo is created not so much to demonize, the government system and military entities, but could it be possible that maybe the ETs themselves have passed down this direct order to not release anything until a certain point?
It's possible. I have no evidence of that. Oh, you hear stories, but no evidence that I've seen that was compelling in any way. But what we do know, and the evidence is quite apparent, that these ETs are allowing themselves to be seen and photographed all over the world.
Yes.
You can't walk through Mexico without running into somebody who has a photograph of a UFO. So if they don't want this to go forward, if they don't want high interest on the ground, and obviously the more people that see these things, the more pressure on the government to deal with the issue, then they sure aren't trying very hard to avoid that. And so I think a more logical assumption is the ETs are in fact encouraging both public awareness of them and probably pressure on the governments to self-disclose this issue to the people.
Well, you're talking to two people right here that had some strange sightings in their life, too, as well. That's what kind of got us onto this course, Just wanted to find out the answers, Yeah. So.
A majority of the people I deal with have had a sighting. I mean, a majority of the people I deal with have been brought into this field because they saw something and it got their attention and they were on board, right? And that's interesting, isn't it? It's like it may not be a coincidence that so many sightings are taking place and all these people are getting involved. I mean, there seems to be an acclimatization project underway, which is leading somewhere.
And as well as highly trained individuals, like military officers and, people with credentials like that, they tend to believe a lot more.
Well, even you get reports from standard airline pilots as well, but I wanted to get your feeling on other forms of alien sort of messaging systems. For example, like crop circles. Do you believe they're real? Does it, make this whole process of full disclosure more interesting, having that as a part of it, or is that just something entirely different?
I have high confidence that crop circles are an extraterrestrial phenomena.
Right.
I also have high confidence that that over the years, more and more circles were made by humans, all right? Creating this rather amazing dialogue that's going on. However you want to couch it, it's an amazing, extraordinary dialogue going on between ETs and humans. Now, that's and it's certainly the most benign of all of the extraterrestrial phenomena. It's a beautiful thing. In fact, the crop circles, to me, is the best clue we have that the ultimate disposition of this matter will be favorable. That once we have acknowledged the ETs are here, once we have formal open contact with extraterrestrials, that overall this will be a good thing, and that we will not be displeased with the new world that we're in. The crop circles are the best clue, and no guarantee. But it's just a wonderful, beautiful, benign form of some kind of communication. There's nothing violent about it. It's not particularly destructive or wasteful. It's really an amazing thing. But beyond that, I can't go. There's tons of research and plenty of theories, and some of the best documentaries of all are about crop circles because they're so beautiful to watch. Many of my colleagues have done them. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I always saw crop circles almost in the same context as aliens communicating to us as we communicate to dolphins, and trying to decipher the language in between. So I'm glad you said that. I totally agree with that point.
I think it's a much more complex communication. I mean, they can communicate with us. They communicate all the time with contactees telepathically. This is not so much a communication of messages. It is a communication of,
consciousness almost.
It's a visual cue which hints at complexity, beauty, benign intent. It's a soothing kind of thing, and I think that is the message being communicated there. But of course, to really understand that message, you'd have to be able to know exactly which of this are ET and which are not. Otherwise, so what you've got is a very mixed thing. But now the messages are all mixed. In fact, maybe even more profound. So now we have the human and the ET messages mixed in these fields and then erased and brought up again, and all that's kind of fascinating to me.
Did you believe that
the imagination as well? Like they're not giving us all the answers on a plate,
Oh no. I don't think they ever will.
Yeah.
I don't think they.
Do you believe
we can handle information, but not everything. There's plenty of things we're probably not ready to handle yet in terms of the way the world works.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there's also visitations by, say, darker species of extraterrestrials, ones that are possibly responsible for the violent abduction phenomenon and cattle mutilation? And even more recently, there's been documents of human mutilation cases as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. First of all, I would say that the evidence for human mutilation is thin. I don't have much confidence in it, and I would encourage people to be very circumspect about that. All right. It's the potential for fear-mongering there is high. I'm not saying for sure it doesn't happen, but I just have significant doubts about that. Secondly, Dark, light, it's relative, isn't it? I will tell you what I have said many times, that when we know a great deal more, which will almost certainly be post-disclosure, if not post-contact, I am fairly confident we're going to learn some things which will be very exciting, very promising, uplifting even. But I am also pretty certain we're going to learn some things which are going to be disturbing. Well, guess what?
That's the real world.
That's life, you know.
Yeah,
that's life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they cracked open the atom at the turn of the not last century, but the century before last. Mm-hmm. And guess what? We learned something. There was enormous promise in that new technology and enormous danger. And that's the way it's always been. So we're going to learn some good things and some bad things. People that are predicting grotesque evil and mass destruction, well, that's been a human trait for 10,000 years. We love to predict those things.
Yep, exactly.
But the evidence doesn't support it. But it does support a complex array of phenomena information that will run the gamut from upsetting to uplifting.
What is your impression on if somebody was to say that they're not actually aliens, but they're more or less from inner dimensions or from the future, coming back to see what we're doing now at this point in time?
Possible, yes. Occam's razor says, you know when I say Occam's razor, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, keep it simplest.
Yeah, that's right. Simplest explanation is usually the right one,
yeah.
And that's a good principle to follow. The simplest explanation for this is they come from other planets. I mean, what could be more straightforward than that? Yep. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever, though some have tried, that the Earth would be the only biosphere in the galaxy. So if there are other biospheres, there's other life. If there's other life, there's other intelligence. If there's other intelligence, they move around. These entities just move around better than we do. That's Occam's razor. So if you're going to bet money, somebody says, well, you got to put everything you own down on one of three possibilities: the planet, future, another dimension. You better put your money down on another planet. You're going to be playing against the house odds.
That's so true. And one more question that I wanted to drop, especially on this topic, because it's a pretty much hot one right now. What do you feel about bases on the moon? And are they something that were there for a lot longer than we know about, or is it more or less like a rest station for these intergalactic travelers?
The base the moon stuff is, boy, messy, murky, difficult, goes back a long ways. I don't have a strong opinion, but I will say this. It makes total sense. It would make total sense for aliens who are maneuvering and interacting with the Earth and perhaps dealing with other planets as well in one form or another, to put a base or bases in the solar system. Right. And the moon, as places go, is a pretty good candidate for it, right? For a lot of reasons. So if I were to learn a few years from now that there's an alien base on the moon, I would not be surprised at all. Now, there is the more exotic theory that the U.S. has developed its own anti-gravity craft and has gone up and built its own bases on the moon.
Yes.
Now, this is a little less likely because there's a time factor here. We got to get our hands on that technology in the late 40s and 50s. We've got to develop it to the point where we can travel out of the atmosphere. We've got to be able to move material up there and what have you. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. So it wouldn't surprise me. But the lore and some of the photographs that have been drawn upon, it's messy. And so I don't invest a lot of time in it. It's not critical. We don't need to have bases on the moon to prove the ET presence on Earth or engaging us on Earth. But it's one of 1,000 items
that I would expect to be, quote, clarified once we get disclosure, which is why the post-disclosure period is going to be rather delightfully interesting. I think we could agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. I asked this question to Nick Pope. I want to ask you, if there was a full-blown landing, how would it affect you personally? Like, if you saw it, witnessed it, from a spiritual point to just an all-out evolving of a new self, like how would it change you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm a secular man. It will not affect me spiritually. I think a better question is, how would I react if two of these entities turned up in my bedroom?
Right.
And I've thought about that many times. First of all, I try to put myself in the shoes of, or the bed rather, of somebody 30, 40 years ago, before all the information, before all the books, and even the movies, suddenly seeing, for whatever reason, two of these entities in their bedroom. I can imagine the terror must have been indescribable. Yeah. Now, in this instance, though, knowing what I know and what I've read, I'm wondering if I would react like that. I think the more you know, the more you have some control over your autonomic nervous system. But I think there would be a gut fundamental fear that would be autonomic and just take over real fast. And the question is, how quickly could you dispel it? But to the question that you raised, let me be clear. The worst part of a mass landing before disclosure takes place is that it will be extremely destructive to the social contracts that exist between the people and their governments.
Right.
Without disclosure, without the formal acknowledgement, where the governments of the world inform their people of some rather important information, if you know what I mean, and have these entities suddenly turn up en masse, then essentially the whole cover-up is put to the lie has been put to it all, and the failure to do the job is acknowledged. The social contract has been broken in a major way, and people are going to be pretty upset, and there's going to be, I think, substantial disruptive consequences. On the other hand, if the government discloses in appropriate fashion, orderly fashion, gets the information to the people without screwing around with it, without trying to manipulate it for governmental agendas, and then the people have a reasonable amount of time to sort of digest that, I think a mass or formal contact will be almost anticlimactic and will be constructive. So there you have it. Now, unless the government has some foreknowledge, unless the government has somehow been informed by the ETs that they have no intention of doing anything like that for the next 100 years or whatever, and so don't worry about us doing, something dramatic like landing on the White House lawn. Keep the old government embargo going as long as you want, and then they risk that happening at any time. But again, that gets into what ETs do, and I don't worry about what ETs are going to do. I have no way of knowing what they're going to do, and they don't tell me anything, and I can't plan over that. I'm only interested in what humans are going to do, and what humans have to do is to self-acknowledge formally through their own governments the presence of these entities, and move into the new age, new paradigm, whatever you want to call it. But it will be different from the old one. In big ways, and that's what this whole advocacy process is about.
And I also suggest to everybody out there who hasn't had a chance to see it yet, definitely check out the X-Con. It was definitely a must-watch, in my opinion. It was super well done. The guests were phenomenal. You can find it on YouTube or even check back with Paradigm Research. I believe you still have the link up for that.
Well, you can get the DVDs of the conference at SedonaMediaCompany.com, C-D-O-N-A, SedonaMediaCompany.com. Those DVDs are up. A video of the press conference of the National Press Club is up at the Paradigm Research Group site. You can find it there. There are also, I should mention, some important exopolitics conferences coming up. There is one in Leeds, England, 27th of June, Exopolitics Expo. First one in Britain. Exo, and they can jump. The paradigmresearchgroup.org site has got links over to that. There's a very important conference coming up in Barcelona on July 25-26. The website is exopoliticseurope.com. This is going to be a big deal. It's at a 4-star hotel near the Mediterranean, and with a 1,300 seating. There's going to be wireless headset simultaneous translation. It's going to be a big deal. And then there's another Exopolitics conference in Liverpool, September 11-12. Now, I'll be in Barcelona. I'm going to be at all three, I think. I'm going to be in Barcelona, Liverpool, and probably at Leeds. My first times to England and to Spain. And many of my colleagues will be there. So check out those if you want to take a vacation. And of course, the Leeds conference is during crop circle season. And so one could go and spend extra time. So I encourage people to think about those conferences. And, of course, there are many other conferences coming up in the U.S. You go to paradigmresearchgroup.com. You can find a conference section there. It's the largest of its kind on the web. And you can see all of the upcoming conferences in the UFO, ET, exopolitics genre coming up at the end of the year.
I also had a side question to ask. How can Joe Average start their own movement in this particular field? Is it too far, too late now, or do you think that there's still a chance for the little guys to get their voices heard too?
Well, if they don't start, there already is a movement. They join up. They need to join up. All right. They need to go to conferences. They can join organizations. We've still got about 40 states that need an exopolitics. Alabama.us and exopolitics Maine.us and exopolitics West Virginia.us. So any webmasters out there with some UFO interest, knowledge, would like to start the site for the Exopolitics United States Network, get in touch with paradigmresearchgroup.org, prg@paradigmresearchgroup.org, and it's yours. Give it a shot. Obviously, the work needs contributions. I mean, the biggest problem we have is funding. The truth embargo has been extremely effective in preventing philanthropists, private people of substantial wealth, certainly all foundations, granting institutions, from providing any funding for this. And so everybody that I'm working with, they're broke. Yeah. They've gone through all of their monies, and they have marginal living. And it limits our ability to fund. It limits the power of this advocacy movement. We cannot get funding. In other words, the government's truth embargo is so much self-sustaining. If the embargo prevents people from funding the opposition to the embargo, then the embargo goes on. And they did that by ridiculing the subject to death for 40 years, so that people are afraid that they will be embarrassed if they fund anything related to the UFO issue. Though we've tried to move away from UFO as an acronym. I mean, it's exopolitics. This is an exopolitical advocacy movement designed to change government policy. We need a funder. One significant funder could come in and with $500,000 could turn everything on its head. That's the major thing. I do have a list, and recently about 100 or so donated almost $4,000, and that was nice. But there's 5,000 people on that list. If all 5,000 had put in $10, they have $50,000. We could have done a lot of things. So funding is the lack of funding was the principal success of the truth embargo. By scaring, frightening, and ridiculing and creating a ghetto around this issue, they were able to prevent good people, thoughtful people, from providing any money to the ones who were willing to take the issue on. So the embargo is now in its 62nd year. However, it is about to end very soon.
Well, I have to say you've been more than a spectacular person to speak with. I'd really like at some point in time to meet you in person and get into details about even more than this, and possibly hear you speak, in a conference or maybe two or maybe three. I want to say thanks for being part of the show. We're now at the end of the hour, and it's been a complete honor to speak to you.
You guys are involved. You're in the game. You're doing your part. Congratulations, and maybe I'll come back to your show again very soon. Till then, all the best.
I would really appreciate that. You have yourself a great night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, now that we're at the end of the show, I just want to say a quick hello to everybody on all of our groups, and a very special thanks to Steve Bassett, all of the faithful that are on MySpace and